Welcome to Mic'd Up for Leadership, the podcast that gives you the tools to lead with confidence. I'm one of your hosts, Alex Dresen, and I'm joined by my longtime friend, colleague, and one-on-one partner, Jourdan Hilaire. Jourdan, how's it going?
Hey man, everything's going pretty well. No complaints on my end. Ready to get started and have a rich conversation.
I think I nailed the opening of a one-on-one. This whole episode is going to be on the one-on-one conversation between team members, and I just started by asking you about how your day is going. So, I knocked it out the park, and everything else is great, obviously, right? All right, maybe there's a little bit more to the podcast that we can go over, but yeah, this week we're going to be going over one-on-ones. We've been talking about situational leadership in the last episode and coaching and supporting conversations, and realized while we labeled the one-on-one as such an important part of a leader's tool bag and how to lead an organization, we never really talked about one, what a one-on-one is, and two, like what the goal is of one of those conversations. So Jourdan, I do want to throw it back over to you and ask you from your perspective what you think a one-on-one conversation, like what it is and what the ultimate goal of that conversation should be.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about a one-on-one, of course, it has to happen between two individuals, right? A lot of times, it depends, right? It depends on the purpose of that one-on-one, right? It could be accountability meeting, it could be a check-in meeting, it could be a programming meeting where you're being able to share information with one another. Um, but essentially, I think that is an opportunity to connect and engage with an individual or a person that you want to get to know a little bit more, but also maybe again share more information too, right? I know from my experiences, hosting and leading one-on-ones with students in particular. I'm always really I wanted to use those one-on-ones as an opportunity to get to know the individual, see how I can support them, but also understand as well who they are, right? As a person, as a student, as a student leader, what are they hoping maybe to gain from their experience in that particular position that they may be in, right? Or they may not be even a student leader, right? They're just a student that they wanted to connect with me and get to know me, or I wanted to connect with them and get to know them a little bit more. So it's really kind of giving you an opportunity to kind of have that kind of you know private kind of conversation where you can definitely be able to share information, but it's a two-way street at the same time, right? It's important for me as the person that is, if I'm the facilitator of that one-on-one, right, to be able to kind of create that to create kind of like that space or that vision of like what this one-on-one is, right? What's maybe the expectation for this particular one-on-one, but it's definitely important for also the person on the other side to understand that it's a give or take as well, right? So if I'm sharing information, I'm hoping that the individual on the other side is also being able to do their best to also open up and share as well. I think that's the only opportunity where a one-on-one can be as effective as possible when both individuals are having active listening ears, right? Be able to understand and hear from one another, but also be able to actually communicate as well.
Man, I tell you, I've had great one-on-ones over the years. I've had terrible one-on-ones, and I'm reflecting on myself, not the person sitting across from me. But that expectation to show up and actively listen, to frame the conversation, we there's so many different things that I think about because really that is supposed to be, in theory, the one time of the week that, or multiple times, right? But usually it's once a week or every other week, the one time of the week where the supervisor and the direct report or the leader and it, or the advisor and the student or what have you has your undivided attention, right? To be able to come into that room, to sit down, to check in on you in any way, shape, or form. But when things get crazy, things are busy, that can be so difficult to do, to have that true undivided attention. I think that the best one-on-ones I've ever had, and something I've tried to model for myself, is when the person that is having the one-on-one shows up with a list, or more importantly, actually emails this list ahead of time and says, "These are the things I want to talk about during a one-on-one. These are the most important things. Get the random updates out of the way, but here's what I want to focus on to get some answers." or here's what I want to check in on because this is a thing I'm struggling with in my personal life, what have you. To really be able to have the person that is um, participating in the one-on-one as in the follower lens or the follower role to really own that space, because it could get so busy and so hectic that a leader stepping in there may have their attention a million different places and not know the right questions to ask. So, Jordan, reflecting back on our time when we used to have one-on-ones together, I appreciated that. I felt like we always had short updates throughout the week where you knew what was I knew what was going on in your world, but you were able to come into that space and really, we chop it up a little bit, right? Kind of talk about whatever's going on in the world. But as soon as it was time, you flipped a switch and you told me exactly what you needed to cover during that space. And it's been a while since we've had a formal supervisor supervisee one on one, but do you remember that time at all?
No, absolutely. Honestly, I've always said that I feel like those are some of my most developmental times as well, right? As a professional, I think that you really get to learn a lot, right, during a one-on-one, especially with your supervisor, right? Because that's an opportunity for you. Because it depends, right? Sometimes one-on-one for 30 minutes, sometimes it can go for an hour and a half, right? Depending on, like you talked about, how much time that you're able to actually give to each other, right? But you can really kind of sharpen skills during a one-on-one, right? You can really have some deep dialogue on a particular experience or incident that may have occurred, right? In your particular, like, responsibilities or your job, where you need to actually kind of like talk through some things, right? Where the supervisor or the manager can maybe share some more perspective, or kind of walk you through, right, certain kind of elements of how to actually conduct, right, whatever is going on, right, or kind of like maybe break down a certain process as well. So that's why I think that our one-on-ones are so valuable, because I believe that I definitely received a lot of that, right. I was able to gain a lot of information, updates, and reminders. But also, if I had a question, or I had a challenge with, whether that is working with a student, or managing a particular res hall, or so on, I definitely knew that I could rely on you in our one-on-ones, so we kind of like break down what's going on, so you can really kind of show me the way in that regard. So that's why I knew that definitely one-on-ones were very impactful. And I also think that's why it's so important, where people that are individuals are mindful of how to kind of operate in a one-on-one, because there's so many different ways that you can go, but definitely making sure that updates are being shared, important information is being shared, but also that coaching, teaching aspect as well is happening at the same time.
The digital land space right now allows for Zoom meetings, right? And so it's easier. I'm going to say easier because I'm going to flash forward. People who know me know I'm notorious for being late all the time for any different way. You're holding back so much laughter right now, but it's true. So it's easier to click on and be present at the start of that meeting. But I think a challenge is that, in my perspective, I always wanted to go to you or to whoever I was supervising in order to be in their space so that they own it even further. That conversation, that I'm entering their world, what's going on. They can literally even show me a facilities issue, or they can have a student stop by if they're struggling with something or they wanted to talk through a situation. Uh, but I think on a college campus, those walks from where I was headquartered all the way to the other side of campus, that was a challenge. And so if I try to be back to back and I was going on for another meeting, that meant I was running late. And so I know that can be a challenge too. So I think the biggest tip that I can give, do as I say, not as I do sometimes, for those listeners
Mhm.
out there. But really starting the meeting on time is such a big win, to start that out with a level of respect and start that out with a level of interest in that person, to know that I want to be in your space. I want to show up on time or communicate if it's going to be delayed and make sure it's mutually agreeable. But to say that we're going to do this thing together and you can count on me for being there at this point in time. So that's a tip I would take away for doing these one-on-ones. Easier said than done.
No, for sure. And I think that's really important. I think it definitely creates it sets up a foundation, right? Of like you said, trust, a genuine like relationship understanding of like, okay, hey, I'm here on time. Let's definitely get to business, but also I want to have some to hopefully I'm glad that I'm here on time. So I actually have now time to, do a check-in, see what's going on in your world outside of, your actual work, right? And a lot of times when you're able to actually have conversations with your supervisee or just a one-on-one in general that's non-work related, that kind of helps you build a stronger bond, right? But also be mindful, I think that's important for students that's conducting one-on-ones or professionals conducting one-on-ones, that I think that's important, that be mindful that not everyone is also willing to actually share personal related information, experiences, stories. So you have to be mindful of that too, and be prepared for that as well, right? Because I've seen that as before as well, where I may ask a student or a full time staff member, oh, how was your day, or how was your week, or how was your weekend? They may not be what they may not want to share, open up too much. So be mindful of that and be ready to actually, like you mentioned, have an agenda prepared, right? To kind of get down to the important information that needs to be shared when it comes to like work related responsibilities and tasks.
You bring up such an important point there. Some people not wanting to have that personal relationship yet until they can form more trust. That that takes me back to one of the first RAs that I had. We never talked about family, and it was something that I always stayed away from because some people have different family structures, and how was your weekend might be a sensitive topic because they had to go home to work or couldn't go home because they're further away and haven't made friends yet on campus or just in general are going through a rough time. So I try to keep it light and give that space for how's it going, but I don't maybe use those motivational interviewing tactics as much necessarily. So I don't know, something to consider in that area.
Yep. I agree. I agree.
So Jordan, after talking about specific, how do I call it, those get to know you conversations, what's the next thing that you want to dive into or want someone to dive in with you? What would be a best practice after that?
Um, I think best practices. I think that uh, that nonverbal communication, right? I think is really important. So having eye contact with the individual, right? If you're having a one-on-one with someone, it's literally just you two in the room, right? So you need to be mindful of that, right? And not looking around, looking down at the paper. Now, there might be some times where, like I said, depending on the type of one-on-one it is, you might need to write some notes down, right? You might need to type up some information, or you may have something like a notebook in hand as well, to make sure that you are recording some of the things that's going on or being shared, so it'll be helpful. 'Cause I remember our one-on-ones, you always had like a notebook, right? Or a notepad, I believe, right? And you was always making sure that you were writing down, some things that we were talked about, so you are familiar with or reminded of the maybe like upcoming programs, right? Or maybe a particular student concern, right? That you may need to follow up with your supervisor, right? So I recognize that that's really important, but being able to actually have that eye contact, and showing them that you are actively listening to the individual, right? So you can actually comprehend what is going on. I think that's really important. And I think that's definitely something that I think we don't talk about enough. But being able to actually show people that, hey, you actually care what's actually being said, I think that definitely goes. I think that's really helpful to really build that trust as well with those individuals.
I appreciate you sharing that. That's not something I was in my show notes in my notebook that you referenced to bring up. So that's a good one. Bring up that nonverbal cue. And I do agree. It is situational. The questions you bring up because it is related to what you already know and have in your notes, what they are giving you in that moment, right? Because if they're usually high energy and then they're shut down and you know them well enough, you can kind of cut through all the crap and say, "Hey, what's going on?" Like, and we can have a real conversation. But if you're noticing that for the first time, you don't have that relationship, it might be more of a okay, take mental note. Don't write down in your notebook that this is going on, but try to be as open and, honest as possible with your body language, with the questions you're asking, genuine, so to speak, and really try to be there as a supportive person and build up the reputation for being a supportive person. I think when I boil it down to the types of questions I might ask in that situation, if it's a chaotic time, um, I'm gonna ask them point blank, what is the most important thing I can do to help you succeed this week?
Hmm.
And cut through everything and like have them name it, because I can think of five different things, but if it's, oh my gosh, can you just like have a talk with my RA, or can you run this to the front office, or can you help with this report because I've been going around in circles and can't pull the data correctly. Sometimes by giving them permission to offer that assistance or to receive that assistance allows them to name the thing that's actually blocking them, or will get them the little win they need to move forward.
Absolutely. And and I'm sure between both of us, we've had probably thousands of one-on-ones, right? Up until this point of our careers. And one thing I would definitely say is I think majority of students, professionals enjoy one-on-ones, or at least appreciate the opportunity to sit down with another person, right, to pretty much like share what's going on with them, whether that's personally, whether that's professionally, as a student leader, what some things they're struggling with or having a challenge with where they need to open up to someone, to get some advice, perspective, or sometimes people just want to vent as well, right? So again, there will be people that don't care for the one-on-one. They don't want to open up, they don't want to share, and they also feel like they may have like got it all taken care of and everything else. But from my experience, I would definitely say about 90% of the um, people that I've had one-on-ones with where I was the facilitator, have told me that they actually appreciated having these conversations, and they actually felt, honestly, better, mentally, emotionally, after leaving out those one-on-ones, which usually average between 30 minutes to an hour. Because I've also learned that they don't have they don't, they're just waiting for, a lot of people are just waiting for an opportunity, or someone to create that type of space, right, where they can actually feel vulnerable enough to actually talk, right, and share what's on their mind. So that's why I believe one-on-ones are really important. But it goes back to what you mentioned, earlier, that even though they're very important, and I encourage student leaders to have one-on-ones with their peers, right? So for an example, if you're a president of an organization, I've always mentioned that if you're a president and maybe a vice president organization, I think you should have one-on-ones with your members, right? Or at least your executive board specifically, right? Because it's similar to if we're full-time professionals having meetings with our student leaders, right? Or our students. It's to give you an opportunity to, one, get to know them, right, on a little bit of a deeper level, but also get an opportunity for you to develop them, right? As I'm thinking about as like a president of an organization, student organization, it gives you opportunity to develop, your executive board, right? Because there might be brand new members in that board that may not be too familiar with their role, their responsibilities, how maybe to conduct themselves in a meeting, in a program, etc. Right? But as a president of organization, usually presidents of organizations or leaders of organizations, they already have at least probably a year, 2 years of experience or information, right? That they can pour back into their peers, right? And it also gives them an opportunity to kind of like feel a little bit more autonomous, right? Instead of having the advisors always, having those one-on-ones and, pouring into the students. Hey, sometimes the leaders of these student organizations, like usually the presidents and vice presidents, can also do the same thing as well, right? So it also develops them for the future too.
And at a minimum, developing a relationship, right? So we want to develop their skills and want to develop the trust, but just to develop a relationship, to know who you're working with, is going to help develop the trust, to then in turn allow for some of those not accountability conversations, but accountability to the organization, that you're not just part of an organization, you're accountable to a person you care about or that cares about you more than just uh, delivering some sort of transactional report or event planning document or whatever that might be. And I think that's where student leaders can really learn a lot about leadership because people join people and people follow people. It's not about the rank. It's not about the position. It's not that just because you are required to send this in that you have to. When it's a volunteer position, you really do have to have that relationship in order to develop a followership. And so
No,
those one-on-ones can be
absolutely.
great.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll end it off by saying, I know we talked about earlier that, sometimes we can be definitely, very busy, right? And I know it sounds simple. It's like, oh, host a one-on-one for 30 minutes to an hour, but sometimes it's really not a lot of time, right, that you have. But that's why I've always encouraged individuals to at least consider hosting at least one-on-one a semester, right, with your team, right? But also understand that some people's teams is comprised of 5 people. It could be 50 people. It could be 100 people, right? Depending on the organizational level that you're at, right? But if you can, at least having one-on-one a semester with your students, student leaders, your full-time professionals, I definitely think we could go a long way of, like you said, building that trust, building that understanding, create setting that foundation expectation for yourself as a supervisor, for them as a direct report or student leader, etc., but also for your organization as well.
Absolutely. Those status updates can wait for the weekly report or the team meeting or what have you. Let's get in there and have a personal relationship. Let's start on time. Let's ask good questions. Let's have active listening skills and empathy. Let's be consistent. What are those other tips, Jordan? I feel like there's so much we touched on. Make room for developmental conversations, even if it has to be outside of that one-on-one. We'll follow up with a special one to talk about what we weren't able to get to.
Absolutely. And then the last thing, like I just, mentioned, you don't have to be, a 10-year vet plus like us to host a one-on-one with students, right? You can be a current student leader, facilitating one-on-ones with your peers, right? So, and again, if you're not comfortable, right, with having those conversations, which is understandable, right? It's okay. That's why you have an advisor for it, right? That's why you have other maybe full-time professionals around where you can seek advisement or seek perspectives on how to facilitate those conversations, whether it is a one-on-one or leading particular groups as well.
Well, Jordan, this goes quickly into our question of the week. We've shared a lot of different tips, but whether it's something that we said that you really want to stand out or something that we haven't touched on that you can share with the audience, what is the most important thing you can do to create a successful one-on-one experience? You name it, you tell us, engage with us on social media. We shared a ton of our tips here, but let's keep the learning going outside of this episode. We're super excited to hear what you have to say about that. Jordan, any final thoughts about one on ones before we foreshadow what's to come in our next episodes?
The only thing I would say is try it out. And I think that you would not be disappointed by um, the effectiveness of your organization after hosting one-on-ones, the trust that you can build through those one-on-ones, um, and what you will be surprised to learn about yourself and the individuals on your team by hosting one-on-ones.
Well said. Well, we've been doing this whole episode and the last four episodes as one on ones. We're really excited to make these more maybe two on ones in the future. We're gonna be mixing in some guests and bringing in their expertise in future episodes. So we're excited to at least spotlight them for a little bit, if not have them on for an entire episode and just let them talk about topic of their choice. So if you're interested in joining us, let us know. Shoot us a DM or an email, or if you know us, you know how to get in touch with us. But otherwise, we have a couple people in mind that we're going to be reaching out to for some early episodes to bring in some new perspectives, fresh perspectives, and mic them up for this podcast. So that's to come very soon. We're excited to hear from you in the interim. So that was our episode on one-on-ones. We hope that we started and ended on time, and if not, hey, don't blame us. We had some 4 or 5 rounds of tech issues. Jordan was
Right,
that going
right,
on?
right.
I've just crossed.
We're gonna tell them all that
Nah,
though.
we don't got time. Okay, fair enough. Well, until next time, we're gonna be looking for you in the comments. Thanks so much for joining us. Again, my name's Alex.
And I'm Jordan.
We'll see you soon. Take care.
Bye.